I am sitting in my lawyer's office holding a letter that arrived 3 days ago. The paper feels heavy in my hands, but not because of its weight. It is heavy because of what it represents. 15 years of silence, 15 years of building my life from absolutely nothing, and now they want my help. The people who threw me out like garbage when I was 19, who believed lies over truth, who chose my twin brother over me without even listening to my side of the story. They think money can erase 15 years of abandonment. They think a simple request for financial assistance can bridge the gap they created when they slammed the door in my face. The irony is almost laughable. Almost. Before I tell you this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. If this situation sounds familiar or hits close to home, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories about family betrayal and redemption. Trust me, you will not believe how this twisted family drama ends, and how sometimes the people who hurt you the most end up needing you the most. Growing up in a small town outside Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, people always said Marcus and I looked identical, but that was where the similarities ended. We might have shared the same face, the same brown hair, and the same height, but our personalities could not have been more different. I was the one who spent hours in our garage taking apart old radios and putting them back together, fascinated by how things worked. Marcus was the one who could talk his way out of any trouble and charm anyone within 5 minutes of meeting them. Our parents, David and Linda, owned a small accounting firm in town. They worked hard to provide us with a comfortable middle-class life, but somewhere along the way, they developed a serious case of favoritism. Marcus could do no wrong in their eyes. When he came home with terrible grades, they would say he was just more creative than academic. When I brought home straight A's, they would nod approvingly, but never showed the same enthusiasm they had for Marcus's latest story about his adventures with friends. By the time we turned 16, the difference in treatment became impossible to ignore. I started working part-time at Johnson's Auto Repair, learning valuable skills and earning my own money. I loved the satisfaction of fixing something that was broken, of solving mechanical puzzles that stumped other people. Meanwhile, Marcus spent his afternoons hanging out with friends, never holding down a job for more than a few weeks. Yet when graduation came around, Marcus received a brand new Ford Mustang as a gift. I used the money I had saved from working at the garage to buy a 10-year-old Honda Civic that needed constant maintenance. The pattern continued through high school. When Marcus got caught cheating on his SATs, our parents hired an expensive tutor and paid for him to retake the test. When I scored in the top 10% of my class without any outside help, they briefly mentioned being proud at dinner, and then spent the rest of the meal discussing Marcus's latest girlfriend drama. I learned early on that hard work and honesty were not as valued in our house as charm and the ability to spin a good story. I should have seen the warning signs then. Marcus had this incredible talent for making people believe whatever version of reality he wanted them to see. He could lie about where he had been, who he had been with, and what he had been doing with such conviction that even I sometimes doubted what I had witnessed with my own eyes. Our parents fell for it every single time, making excuses for behavior they would never have tolerated from me. By the time we turned 19, I was attending the local community college studying electrical engineering while still working at the garage. I had managed to save up exactly $2,000 for my college expenses by working extra shifts and living as cheaply as possible. Marcus had taken what he called a gap year, which really meant sleeping until noon and partying with his friends most nights. Our parents continued to support him financially while expecting me to be completely independent. I kept my college savings in a separate account that I had opened specifically for educational expenses. I was proud of that money because every single dollar represented hours of hard work, oil-stained hands, and determination to build a better future for myself. I had even memorized the account balance down to the last cent because I checked it religiously before each semester. That is why I knew immediately that something was wrong when I went to pay for my spring semester classes. The computer screen showed a balance of $300 when it should have shown $2,300. My heart started racing as I requested a detailed statement from the bank teller. The withdrawals were all made from ATMs around town over the past month, always in amounts of $100 or $200. I recognized the pattern immediately. These were not random thefts by a stranger who had somehow gotten hold of my card information. These withdrawals were made by someone who knew my daily routine, someone who knew exactly when I would not be checking my account, someone who had access to my personal information. The only person who could have known my PIN was Marcus. I had trusted him with it months earlier when I had asked him to make a withdrawal for me when I was stuck at work. When I confronted Marcus in our shared bedroom that evening, his initial reaction was pure indignation. How dare I accuse him of stealing? Did I think he was some kind of criminal? He put on such a convincing performance of wounded innocence that I almost backed down. Almost. But the numbers did not lie, and I had learned enough about Marcus over the years to recognize his tells when he was lying. After 20 minutes of heated argument, Marcus finally broke down and admitted what he had done. He had been gambling online, he said, and had gotten in deeper than he expected. He had also been buying drugs, not just marijuana, but harder substances that I had not even known he was using. He swore he would pay me back, promised it would never happen again, begged me not to tell our parents because it would kill them to know what he had become. I wanted to believe him. Despite everything, he was still my brother, and some part of me hoped that this crisis might finally wake him up to the damage he was doing to his life. I agreed to give him 2 weeks to come up with a plan to repay the money, 2 weeks to get his life together and prove that he was serious about changing. I should have known better. 3 days later, I came home from work to find both of my parents waiting for me in the living room. Their faces were grim, disappointed, and angry in a way I had never seen before. My mother could barely look at me, and my father was holding what looked like bank statements and printed screenshots. Marcus was sitting on the couch across from them, his eyes red and puffy, as if he had been crying. He looked up at me with an expression of hurt and betrayal that would have won him an Academy Award. In that moment, I knew exactly what had happened, but I could not quite believe that even Marcus would go this far. My father spoke first, his voice cold and controlled in a way that made my blood run cold. He told me that Marcus had come to them in tears, confessing that I had been stealing money from his account for months. According to Marcus's version of events, I had pressured him into giving me his PIN by claiming I needed to make an emergency withdrawal for car repairs. Then I had systematically drained his savings account to fund my own college expenses and probably drugs, since I had become increasingly secretive and hostile recently. The evidence Marcus had presented was convincing, I had to admit. He had somehow created fake screenshots showing money being transferred from his account to mine. He had printed out ATM receipts that appeared to show me making withdrawals from his account at times when I was supposedly at work. He had even created a fake text message conversation where I allegedly pressured him to keep quiet about the thefts by threatening to tell our parents about his recreational marijuana use. I tried to explain what had really happened. I showed them my own bank statements, pointed out the inconsistencies in Marcus's story, and begged them to call the bank to verify the real transaction history. But Marcus had gotten to them first, and he had years of practice at being the favorite child. Every piece of evidence I presented, they dismissed as something I could have faked. Every logical explanation I offered, they countered with emotional manipulation about how disappointed they were in me. The conversation in the kitchen with my mother was the most painful moment of my entire life up to that point. She looked at me with tears in her eyes and said the words that still echo in my mind today. "I raised you better than this, Sammy." I do not know where I went wrong, but I never thought my own son would steal from his brother and then lie about it to my face. My father was even worse. He told me that he had always known there was something different about me, something jealous and resentful that he had hoped I would outgrow. Now he realized that my resentment had turned into something much darker. The disappointment in his voice was so thick, I could practically touch it. Marcus sat through all of this occasionally, adding details to his story, sometimes breaking down in fresh tears when he talked about how betrayed he felt. He was giving the performance of his lifetime, and our parents were buying every single word. The ultimatum came at the end of a 2-hour conversation that left me feeling emotionally battered and completely alone. Either I confessed to stealing the money, apologized to Marcus, and agreed to pay him back with interest, or I needed to find somewhere else to live. They would not have a thief living under their roof, and they certainly would not continue to support my education if I was going to use their money to fund criminal behavior. When I refused to confess to something I had not done, when I continued to insist that Marcus was lying and that I could prove it if they would just listen, my father made the decision that would change the trajectory of my entire life. I had 24 hours to pack my belongings and leave their house. I was not welcome back until I was ready to tell the truth and make amends for what I had done. That night, I lay awake in the bedroom I shared with Marcus, listening to him breathe in the bed 3 feet away from mine. I kept waiting for him to break to admit what he had done to show even a shred of remorse for destroying my relationship with our parents. Instead, he slept peacefully while I stared at the ceiling and tried to figure out how my life had fallen apart so completely in the span of 3 days. The next morning, I packed everything I owned into 2 suitcases and a few boxes. My parents watched from the kitchen window as I loaded my belongings into my old Honda Civic, but neither of them came outside to say goodbye. Marcus was nowhere to be seen, probably sleeping off another late night of partying while I became homeless because of his lies. The first few weeks of homelessness were the hardest things I had ever experienced. I slept in my car in different parking lots around town, trying to avoid the police and the security guards who would inevitably tell me to move along. I showered at the local gym where I had maintained a membership, and I ate as cheaply as possible to stretch the few $100s I had left after Marcus drained my college fund. Johnson, my boss at the auto repair shop, was the only person who showed me any kindness during those dark weeks. He let me work extra shifts to earn more money, and he never asked too many questions about why I suddenly needed so many hours. He probably suspected something was wrong at home, but he was decent enough not to pry into business that was not his own. After a month of living in my car and working 16-hour days just to afford motel rooms on the coldest nights, I made a decision that would define the rest of my life. I was done with Pennsylvania, done with my hometown, and definitely done with my family. I had saved up enough money for a security deposit on a cheap apartment, but instead of staying local, I decided to take that money and start completely over somewhere else. Colorado had always appealed to me because of the job opportunities in renewable energy and the lower cost of living compared to the East Coast. I packed up my Honda Civic one more time, drove west for 3 days, and arrived in Denver with less than $500 to my name and no connections to anyone in the state. Starting over at 20 years old with no family support and no safety net was terrifying, but it was also liberating in a way I had not expected. For the first time in my life, every success would be entirely my own, and every failure would be something I could learn from without worrying about disappointing anyone else. I found work immediately on a construction crew that was building a new shopping center on the outskirts of the city. The pay was decent, and the physical work helped me process the anger and hurt I was carrying from my family's betrayal. More importantly, I met Jake Morrison, the electrical foreman who would become the closest thing to a father figure I had ever had. Jake was in his 50s, weathered and wise, with 40 years of experience in electrical work and a natural talent for teaching. He saw something in me that even I did not recognize at the time. Within a few weeks of working together, he started giving me additional responsibilities and teaching me advanced techniques that most apprentices did not learn until they had been in the field for years. Under Jake's mentorship, I discovered that I had a natural aptitude for electrical systems that went far beyond what I had learned tinkering in my childhood garage. I understood intuitively how power flowed through complex networks, and I could troubleshoot problems that stumped electricians with decades more experience than me. Jake encouraged me to enroll in trade school for electrical engineering, while continuing to work construction during the day. It meant 18-hour days and very little sleep, but I was motivated by a determination to prove that I could succeed without any help from the people who had abandoned me. The trade school program was intensive and challenging, but I thrived in an environment where merit was the only thing that mattered. My grades were excellent, my practical skills were even better, and my instructors began suggesting that I consider starting my own business rather than working for someone else long term. By the time I turned 22, I had completed my electrical certification and had learned everything Jake could teach me about the construction industry. I also had discovered a passion for renewable energy systems, particularly solar panel installations. Colorado was experiencing a boom in sustainable energy, and there was huge demand for skilled technicians who could design and install complex solar arrays. Jake helped me get my contractor's license and loaned me enough money to buy my first work truck and a basic set of professional tools. I started Sammy's Solar Solutions as a one-man operation working out of a rented garage and taking on small residential installations that the bigger companies considered too minor to bother with. The business grew faster than I had ever imagined possible. My attention to detail, combined with genuine care for customer satisfaction, led to word-of-mouth referrals that kept me booked solid for months in advance. Within 2 years, I had hired 3 full-time employees and was bidding on commercial projects that would have seemed impossible when I was sleeping in my car. By my 25th birthday, Sammy's solar solutions had expanded into 3 states and was generating over $1 million in annual revenue. I had invested wisely in real estate and stock portfolios, and I was financially secure in ways that I had never dreamed possible when I was 19 years old and homeless. More importantly, I had built a chosen family of people who valued loyalty, honesty, and hard work. Jake had become the father I had always needed. My employees were like siblings who actually supported each other, and the customers who trusted me with their homes and businesses were the community I had never found in my hometown. The success was satisfying, but the emotional growth was even more valuable. Through therapy and the support of people who genuinely cared about my well-being, I learned that my worth as a person was not determined by my family's approval or disapproval. I did not need their validation to be successful, and I certainly did not need their presence in my life to be happy. For 15 years, I maintained absolutely no contact with my parents or Marcus. I changed my phone number, moved multiple times, and built a life that had no connection whatsoever to my past in Pennsylvania. I was not hiding from them, but I was not making myself available to them either. 3 weeks ago, my phone rang at 7:30 in the morning while I was reviewing construction plans for a new project. The number was unfamiliar, but something about the area code made my stomach drop. It was from Pennsylvania. Against my better judgment, I answered the call. My mother's voice sounded older, shakier than I remembered, but I recognized it immediately, even after 15 years of silence. She told me that she had tracked down my contact information through a private investigator, which had taken her months and cost more money than she could afford. She said she had been trying to find me for years, but had never had the courage to actually make the call until now. The reason for her call was exactly what I had expected and dreaded. Marcus was in serious trouble. His gambling addiction had escalated over the years until he had lost everything he owned and had accumulated debts to some very dangerous people. He was facing criminal charges for embezzling money from his employer to fund his gambling habit. He needed expensive rehabilitation treatment and legal representation that the family could not afford. Additionally, my father had suffered a massive heart attack the previous year. The medical bills from his surgery and ongoing treatment had drained their savings account and forced them to take out a second mortgage on the house I had grown up in. They were now facing foreclosure and had nowhere else to turn for help. My mother's voice broke as she admitted that Marcus had finally confessed to lying about the money 15 years ago. He had told them the truth about stealing from my college fund, about creating fake evidence to frame me, and about manipulating them into throwing me out of the house. She said they realized they had made a terrible mistake and wanted to make amends. But then came the real reason for the call. They needed my help financially. Family should help family, she said. Blood was thicker than water, and despite everything that had happened, I was still their son, and Marcus was still my brother. Surely I had been successful enough over the years to spare some money for the people who had raised me. I listened to her entire speech without interrupting, feeling a strange sense of detachment from the whole situation. This woman who had chosen to believe lies over truth, who had thrown me out of my childhood home without a second thought, who had not spoken to me in 15 years, was now asking me to bail them out of problems created by the same person, who had destroyed my relationship with them in the first place. When she finished talking, I was quiet for a long moment. Then I told her in the calmest voice I could manage that they had made their choice 15 years ago when they decided Marcus was more important than the truth. I had made my choice as well, and that choice was to build a life without people who would abandon me when things got difficult. I explained that I had learned the hard way that family was not just about sharing blood. Real family meant loyalty, trust, unconditional love, and the willingness to listen when someone you care about is telling you the truth. The people who had raised me had shown me that they were capable of none of those things. I told her that I was sorry to hear about my father's health problems and Marcus's addiction, but those were consequences of choices they had all made without my involvement. I would not be providing financial assistance, and I would not be reopening communication with any of them. Before she could respond, I hung up the phone and immediately blocked the number. That afternoon, I called my attorney and instructed him to send a formal cease and desist letter if they attempted to contact me again through any means. 3 days later, I received the letter I mentioned at the beginning of this story. It was a formal written request for financial assistance, along with copies of medical bills, foreclosure notices, and a handwritten apology from Marcus. that was probably supposed to make me feel guilty enough to change my mind. I threw it all in the trash without reading past the first paragraph. The truth is that forgiveness does not mean you have to let toxic people back into your life. I learned a long time ago that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well without the people who wronged you. I built a multi-million-dollar business from absolutely nothing, created a chosen family of people who genuinely care about me, and found peace and happiness that I never could have achieved if I had remained trapped in that cycle of dysfunction and favoritism. My parents made a choice 15 years ago to believe lies over truth and to value manipulation over honesty. They chose Marcus over me, and they have to live with the consequences of that decision. I made a choice too, and that choice was to build a better life than anything they could have given me anyway. I do not need their validation, their approval, or their presence in my life to be successful and happy. That is the only validation I will ever need. So, let me ask you this. Have you ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally? Have you ever had to choose between forgiving toxic family members and protecting your own peace of mind? Leave your thoughts in the comments below because I would love to hear your stories and perspectives on this situation. If this story resonated with you or made you think about your own family dynamics, please hit that like button and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming family trauma and building the life you deserve. And remember that sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you were born into. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you remember that your worth is not determined by other people's ability to see it.